Good morning. It's good to see you this first of the year. I am Michael Griffin. I am chair of the Northwest Indiana Regional Planning Commission, and I've asked Commissioner Justin Keel to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Will you join us, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated, and welcome. A couple of housekeeping matters, and then I'm going to ask everybody to go around the room at the table here and introduce themselves. I am reliably advised that we are still 3 short of having the legally required quorum. That will not bother us for most of the business that's on the agenda this morning, except for the matter of reorganization, which is essentially the matters under item 6 on our agenda. So at the outset, if there is no objection from the membership and from the executive committee, I'm going to proceed on every matter in ad seriatim, meaning or per seriatim, meaning I'm going to take them in order except item 6, unless we have been reliably advised that we have a quorum at that time. And then I'll move that matter to the end if there's no objection, in the hopes that a quorum will be attained. And if no quorum is attained with the full commission, this matter will be set aside for the next meeting, either a special meeting or the regular standing meeting of the full commission, because the state law, as Dave Hollenbeck will advise us, requires that the commission take that matter. Its organizational construct requires the full matter. Also, if you look behind Mr. Carnahan, who will introduce himself in just a moment, there's a large sort of post with a small sort of rectangular box in the top. Although these meetings are recorded and later posted after the fact online, you can see how you look. I kind of freak out about it. That is actually live streaming us today. So in order for that to be effective, we're sort of experimenting with where it should be located. We're going to ask as you speak today, if you choose to do that, that you do so from your outside voice, perhaps, instead of your inside usual voice, or at least your best enunciating voice. I'm sure a body of elected officials talking loudly won't be difficult. Also, I know that we have Joyce Newland with us from the Federal Highway Administration. Ms. Newland, are you there? Am I not talking loud enough? All right. I would like, it's been our custom to actually go around the room and have each commissioner say good morning and introduce themselves again. Although many of us know each other, it's just helpful for the new members here. And then we'll proceed with the regular order of business if there's no objection. So I'll begin. Again, I am Michael Griffin. I am the clerk treasurer for the town of Highland, and I am proud to be the chair, I hope soon to be past chair, but let's see, of the Northwest Indiana Regional Planning Commission.
I'm Dave Hollenbeck, and it's my privilege to be your lawyer.
I'm Craig Stinson from the Porter Town Council.
Bill Emerson, Lake County Surveyor.
Mary Thorne, nurse's staff.
Rich Brozeski, the Board County Commissioner. Mark Prince, Mayor of the Port.
Andrew Karras, Crown Point Council.
Bob Carnahan, Cedar Lake Town Council. Chris Anderson, Lake Station Mayor.
Good morning, Jane Jordan, Birds Harbor, Clerk Treasurer. Jan Babbs, Dune Acres, Clerk Treasurer.
Kerry Kirkham, the Port County Council.
Rick Powers, Deputy Commissioner and Port.
Don Edson, Town Hebron.
Chad Gerald, Thomas Schneider.
Bill Farrellbeck, Lowell Town Council. Brian Snedeker, Mayor Porter.
Joe Stahura, Mayor Whiting.
Mary Tanis, Thayer Town Council.
George Topple, Union Township Trustee in Porter County.
Richard Harden, Maryville Town Council. Jeff Larson, Porter County Council at Large.
Tom Pfaff, Westville Town Council.
Anthony Copeland, Mayor, City of East Chicago.
Justin Keel, La Crosse Town Council.
Jim Tunn, Chesterton Town Council.
Diane Noel, Clerk Treasurer.
Jeff Benson, Beverly Shores Town Council. Ty Warner, Executive Director for NERC.
Thank you all very much and welcome. Everyone in the back, we're glad to have you here. We've got so much ahead of us. I hope it will allow us to forbear ourselves to move forward, but we're very glad that you're here today. We now are at the portion of our agenda that allows for public comment. Pursuant to policies of the Northwest Indiana Regional Planning Commission, we've required public comment sign-up. We have one person who's done so. That's Mr. Jim Nowacki of Gary, who wishes to speak about the matter of INDOT. I will remind you that under our current rules, we'd like your comments to not go ahead of 3 minutes if possible. And I don't need to tell Mr. Nowacki, and he never does this, he doesn't do name calling, he's never vulgar. And I'm hopeful he'll continue in that stead. And we appreciate the respect that you'll continue to show. Mr. Nowacki, you're recognized for 3 minutes or less.
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. My name is Jim Nowacki. I'm a resident of the city of Gary. I come before this body oftentimes complaining about NDOT projects in the city of Gary, particularly the $40 million road improvements along Route 12 and Route 20. The road is in a condition now after a few years, deteriorating way faster than would be expected. This is due largely to the fact that the contractor didn't do the job properly, and that the state didn't properly supervise the job as it was being installed. I've recently been complaining about the State 53, the Broadway Project, a $15 million project that at the last meeting I had brought up the serious deficiencies and the early deterioration of that road, and I'd remind the commissioners that this road is now just over 1 month old. 1 month old. It has reflection cracks all through the installation. We have potholes forming. We have sections of the road that are showing dips under the pavement, areas where the sewer grate as much as 9 or 10 inches below the surface of the surrounding pavement. And the reason this is important to bring before this commission is many of you may or may not know that once these projects are accepted by the state, and the reason that the contractor doesn't come back and fix the problems is because once these projects are accepted by the state, it's ours. So if the state isn't doing a proper job supervising the installation as it's going in, and they sign the last check and receive the road, now it's our problem. That's the reason why the flooding on Fifth Avenue, that everyone agrees is a problem, but can't be fixed because the state has accepted the road. Contractor has no more responsibility. And the fault there is not simply that the contractor pays someone off, gets away with doing a sloppy job. The problem is this, that the state is not supervising it. When I was on the Broadway, Mr. Chairman, am I running out of time?
You're getting close. You've got
Okay.
45 seconds.
Yeah, when I bring attention to the state supervisory personnel and point this out, point this out, point this out, before the work is done, and then they just go over and do it anyways. And the result is that a road not 30 days old, 1 month old, is so obviously falling apart. You don't need to have any technical assistance. You can just look at the road and say, the road's not supposed to be falling apart like this. So, I don't know if it requires a lawsuit. I don't know if it requires just the board holding Mr. Powers and Mr. Soliday responsible. But you're going to hear about it for the next 3 years, so get comfortable. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nowacki. Thank you for keeping it to 3 or less minutes. Yes.
We do have a point.
Thank you. Thank you all for contributing to the report. Thank you for that news, Mary. That's good news. So we'll be able to conduct our agenda. Right, back to Plan A. I'm now recognizing the Attorney Dave Hollenbeck, who will offer the certificates of any new appointments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have 2 certificates of appointment to acknowledge this morning. The town of Burns Harbor has appointed Jane Jordan, who is with us. Welcome. And Mayor of Gary, Karen Friedman Wilson, has reappointed herself. Very good. So those are in proper form and order, and welcome, Jane.
Welcome, Jane. Thank you, Mr. Hollenbeck. We now have our presentation to edify us, and I'm going to recognize Ms. Laura Kegel, who's with South Shore Clean Cities. She's the communications person there, and I'm going to ask her to introduce the person who will be giving our presentation today.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone. So I will be very, very brief, but I want us to just take a moment. You know, I was thinking about this as I was coming here today. This is a body comprised almost exclusively of elected officials, and a room comprised primarily of planners, correct? I would argue that we are all in the business of hope. None of you would have sought election if you did not think that you had the opportunity to make it better for your families, your constituents, and really for the future. Well, our Carl Lissick, who apologizes for not being able to be here today, has a column in the Times every month, And that was the topic of his column this month, is that those of us in the environmental industry are also in the business of hope. And I would argue that is exactly what Sean is going to be talking to you about here today. How it is that something deceitful, abhorrent, negative, that happened with Volkswagen could be turned into something positive and hopeful for a better future for our entire region. Those of you who know us at South Shore Clean Cities know that's exactly what we do. We work with communities, public-private, nonprofit organizations to find a better way for cleaner air, for energy security, and for sustainable transportation in all of those sectors. We are working already with our Green Fleet members to do just that. We have a wonderful celebration in Hobart on Tuesday of their new compressed natural gas fueling stations and their new vehicle garage to be able to service those vehicles that they have there. And those were funded in large part 80% through CMAQ funds through NERC. That was made possible because of this kind of a partnership. And that's what Green Fleet does, that's what we manage through NERC. So we just want folks to keep all of these things in mind in terms of how South Shore Clean Cities, how the Green Fleet program that South Shore Clean Cities manages for NERC plays into everything that Sean's going to be talking to you about today. And keep those hopeful thoughts in mind for how these things that he's going to be discussing can make for a better region, because I know that's why we're all here today. I'd like to welcome Sean Seals-Abida.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Is this my outside voice?
Good.
I am also really, I struggle staying in one place when I talk, so it is possible that I might get a little bored and wander around. If that happens and you can't hear me, let me know, okay? We've got cool music.
Yeah.
I like the mood.
Who was it that got on the phone?
I've never been seen as a beacon of hope, but
Joyce,
the
are you
music
there?
gives me some sense.
I'm here, yeah, but
Yeah.
I don't know what that music is. I apologize. Somebody, they get ready to say something, and then do you know who else joined the call?
Yes.
No, you're the only one I know of. Okay, thanks.
So if somebody else is on, they've got, you're on that phone. Joyce is on the phone.
Premise going.
Joyce, I think we'll need to mute you, so as long as you can still hear, we're going to turn off the...
Always something, right?
You should proceed, Mr. Seals. Thank you.
Well, once again, I appreciate everybody being here and giving me a little bit of time to share what I think really is some good news, some exciting news. A brief introduction as to who I am. You'll be seeing me again here in a few weeks in a different sort of form, if you will. But my title is Senior Environmental Manager at IDEM. What I do predominantly at IDEM is I administer what's known as the Diesel-Wise Indiana program. It is a grant program that provides pass-through funds to reduce diesel emissions across the state of Indiana. So when we talk about Volkswagen, none of this is my first rodeo. I've been doing this for 16 years now. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the overview. I always find these slides to be tedious because why tell me what you're going to tell me and then tell me. I realize the repetition and all, but we're going to talk a little bit about the trust itself, what Volkswagen did and how we got here. We're going to talk a little bit about the Indiana-specific program. We're going to talk about what are eligible projects, and I think that's a key area that we really want to spend some quality time on. Because there's a lot of misinformation out there about what you can use these funds for, so we want to be clear about that. We're going to talk about the Beneficiary Mitigation Plan. There's like a two-phase process. That's the first phase. That's kind of where we're at now. And then we'll kind of roll into the project application and more of the sort of interesting details to some. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. It was found by that, as Lori pointed out, Volkswagen had this really cool idea, or at least they thought so, to do some work with their 2 and 3 liter diesel engines that were model year roughly 2009 through 2016. And they installed a computer algorithm that basically turned the emission control devices off when it was running up and down the road, and turned them on when it knew it was being tested. The benefit to Volkswagen was better fuel efficiency. The disbenefit to the state of Indiana and the nation is excess NOx emissions. So that ultimately was discovered. You'll often hear the term, and I put this second bullet up here only because it's an interesting term that you'll hear a lot. These algorithms are called defeat devices for whatever reason. So if you hear the term defeat devices, what they're really talking about is the computer algorithm that Volkswagen put into play in their vehicles. So in the end, the final settlement included $14.7 billion in total that Volkswagen had to use to buy back and/or modify these affected vehicles. And they had to support state and national projects to reduce NOx emissions. These are what we refer to as the mitigation projects. Of that 14.7, 10 billion is the buyback portion. I'm in beautiful Northwest Indiana. You all have probably been somewhere near the Gary Airport and seen the hundreds and hundreds of Volkswagen vehicles stacked out there. They're in the midst of that buyback process right there. 2 billion of those dollars will be used for a zero-emission vehicle investment, and that's administered by Volkswagen. This is outside of what we're talking about today, but it's very focused on zero-emission vehicles. What we're really talking about today is the $2.7 billion that the states have been provided through an environmental mitigation trust, okay? So the Indiana Trust financials. So the funds from the mitigation trust are allocated by the number of Volkswagen vehicles that were affected in each and every state. So in Indiana, that equates to 41 million out of the 2.7 billion. In California, they're in the hundreds of millions, as are they in Florida. So we didn't have nearly as many of these vehicles as some, but based on the computer calculation, we have $41 million worth of these vehicles that provided us that fund for NOx emission reductions. Those are going to be the funds that we're going to roll out through the program here within the next year or so as we kind of work through our schedule. And what you'll see here is the project period can be no less than 3 years and no more than 10 years. And I bring that to your attention because there are a lot of people that are of the impression that $41 million day one, write a check, here we go. That isn't the way that it is structured. It is structured the way it is with the minimum of 3 years, predominantly so Volkswagen doesn't have to roll $14.7 billion out in one big check. They are a large corporation, but even a large corporation would struggle to write a check like that. So this is the timeline for our Indiana Trust program as it exists. Some of this is historical, some of this is what you'll have coming into the future. So you'll see the court approved that partial settlement started this process in October of 2016, year and a half-ish ago. That was a while ago. The trust took effect and Volkswagen deposited funds into the trust in October of last year. That is what is known as the trust effective date. In previous versions of the consent decree and the mitigation trust document, those were the funds that was the timeline when everything kind of started. That was the clock, if you will. The clock is different now and it's not nearly as concerning. Governor Holcomb on October 4th identified IDEM as the beneficiary through an executive order, and at that same time, he created an advisory committee. That advisory committee is going to be up here. Brian, you said February 6th? Obviously, I should know that, but I'm going to be going everywhere, so they're all on my calendar. One doesn't stand out. The 6th it is, okay. So we'll be back up here talking in a different format with different information and a different sort of dialogue here in less than a month. States will elect to become the beneficiaries of the trust. We've already done that. We've filed the official paperwork to the trustee. Roughly, I'm thinking within the next month or two, we're going to get notified that we were selected as the trustee on behalf of the state of Indiana, and then we will act as the beneficiary administering this program. Let's see, the BMP is the phase that we're in now. We're probably going to be filing that. We're looking at probably spring, summer
this year. It says winter, spring, could be winter, could be spring, probably won't be summer. States may request the funds, that kind of comes down the road once everything else falls into place. And then lastly, the Mitigation Trust will release a solicitation for projects for the first round of funding. So we'll talk about this from the standpoint that there are two phases. There's the BMP phase, which is the development of the Beneficiary Mitigation Plan, and there's the second phase, which is the project phase, where we take applications for eligible projects. In October of last year, we did put out a website specific to Indiana's program on Volkswagen. Has anybody been there yet? Okay, I see some that have been there. I would encourage you to go ahead and hit the webpage if for just this one reason. Despite the fact there's a lot of good information on the page, when you hit that webpage for the very first time, it's going to give you the opportunity to sign up for automated updates when any information on the webpage changes. This is going to be the portal that we use for everything as it relates to outreach for Volkswagen. So if we have a media release, it's going to be there. If we're announcing outreach events, they're going to be there. So signing up on that page will make sure that you and your constituents are very aware of what's going on, so I'd encourage you to do that. It also has a lot of information on what the Volkswagen settlement was, what it wasn't, what eligible projects are. So if you're getting questions from folks, you have really two easy answers. One is you can refer to them to Indiana's Volkswagen website, where they'll get all the information that they really need. Or two, you can just send them to me. Either way is equally fine because I end up with all the questions one way or the other. It's just the path that it follows. So that's our brief introduction to the website. This slide is probably one of the more important pieces as you start to hear folks coming to you and saying, hey, we've got a great project idea for the city or the county or your township or whatever. Make sure that whatever those projects are that they're mentioning fall into some of these sort of categories. Because there are a lot of projects out there that people have as ideas that are great concepts, but they simply are not eligible to be funded based on the language of the consent decree. Most of you here are very familiar with the way consent decrees and the law reads. There's not a lot of wiggle room in this. So the coolest project in the world that is not eligible is still a cool project, and it is still not eligible. So what ultimately you've got are Class 8 local freight and port drayage trucks. These are just your big over-the-road tractor trucks. Those are eligible. What I will say is the majority of the project types that you see here are vehicle or engine replacement types of projects. Engine replacement meaning maybe we take the engine out of this old piece of equipment and put a newer, cleaner one in. Or a vehicle replacement where we take that whole thing, we scrap it, and we put out a brand new vehicle. That's generally what these kind of fall into. So we're talking about replacing or repowering Class 8 trucks, Class 4 through 8 school shuttle and transit buses. I know there's a lot of talk about school transit and shuttle buses. Freight switcher locomotives. This seems to all of a sudden be a really hot topic. I think one thing that's really important to note here is that a switcher locomotive is literally a locomotive that has less than 2,000 horsepower. There are a lot of other ways you can move rail cars, but if it's not defined as a locomotive, it's not eligible for replacement. There's just a lot of traction with questions on that here lately. Ferries and tugboats. We're probably not going to replace tugboats or ferries, but we'll certainly look at the eligibility of repowering them with something newer and cleaner. Class 4 through 7 local trucks, these are kind of like your medium duty, I call them box trucks, those that you kind of see shuttling about, that's what those would be. Airport ground support equipment, this is a really cool addition in my world of diesel emission reductions. We haven't had a lot of programs that have allowed us to actually take some of that ground support equipment and replace it with something a little newer, cleaner, and greener. Forklifts, cargo handling equipment at ports, those pieces of equipment that move stuff about the port. That goes all the way from the giant gantry train or crane all the way down to the little forklift. The entire thing is eligible. You'll see that next bullet says light-duty zero electric vehicle supply equipment. Then it says up to 15%. Two key points I think we want to make here to remember. It is supply equipment. Easier term to remember, infrastructure. This is not about buying and selling or buying and replacing vehicles with electric vehicles. It's about providing the infrastructure for them. And we can set aside up to 15% of our application for that purpose. We'll talk in a bit about how we ultimately will determine that. And then the last one is what's called the DERA option. The DERA option exists primarily because the consent decree is pretty explicit about what is and is not eligible. The DERA option provides a lot more flexibility. So what the DERA option would allow for would be idle reduction strategies. The VW funds can't be used for idle reduction strategies, DERA can. So what we are permitted to do is to use some of those Volkswagen funds as our match or an overmatch for a DERA program. Now the downside to that is that we would have to meet the DERA match requirements, not the Volkswagen match requirements. They're not nearly as, I'll say, appealing to the end user right now. Those things change every year though, so we really don't know where those will go. So here's where we're at. We're at phase one, the beneficiary mitigation plan. What we're doing right now is developing this. Now what must that include? It has to explain the beneficiary, and remember on October 4, IDEM was identified as the beneficiary. It has to explain the beneficiary's overall goal for the use of the trust funds. I'll be working diligently on this. That one's pretty easy, to reduce NOx emissions. I think that's pretty much the overall goal. We'll get a little more detail, but in essence, that's what it's about. Describe the NOx reductions that we expect to plan to achieve. Just do some calculations and show what these are going to result in. List the categories of projects the beneficiary intends to implement. This is a key thing where it says categories of projects. The beneficiary mitigation plan is kind of like a map. And just like a map, you'll see there are various ways to get to the end. This will serve as a guide that we will do our best to follow, but we may find that that map, that beneficiary plan, might be something subject to change over time. Maybe we'll find that the demand for a certain type of project doesn't necessarily match up with what we included or incorporated into that BMP. If that's the case, we always have the opportunity to go back to the trustee and revise that document. It's going to explain how we will consider benefits to air quality in communities with a disproportionate air pollution burden, and explain how we will seek and consider public input. How we're seeking and considering public input is the advisory committee process that we'll be talking about here in a bit. And it says make other statements to allow the public and the trustee to better understand the goals of the plan. I love this bullet. These come from the mitigation trust or the consent decree. These sort of descriptions of what it must be. That last bullet means make it simple enough that people actually understand it. And that will certainly be our goal. So right now, the beneficiary plan is open for comments. Who in this room knew that?
We do now.
You do now, that's okay, right? It is not uncommon. Usually the best I ever get when I ask most of my questions is half the people. So, you know, we're doing okay here today. It's open for comments, and we obviously, the best way to get to that is you're going to go through the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust portal. And the types of comments that we're really seeking input on, because remember, this is the map. And there are some states that have just decided from the top down, this is what we're going to do with our Volkswagen money. In Indiana, we didn't choose that approach. In Indiana, what we chose to do was reach out to Indiana stakeholders and interested parties and say, how do you think we should allocate and spend these funds? Because in the end, I don't own that many vehicles and you all do. So let's let you all decide what makes most sense for the use of these funds. So what we're asking folks to do is to tell us what of these project types that I mentioned earlier make sense to you. Do you think there's value in doing diesel vehicle replacement and repowers? What types of vehicles make the most sense? Do you think there's value in doing locomotives, the marine applications, ground support equipment? You know, tell us what you think is valuable. Here in Northwest Indiana, port cargo handling equipment, yeah, y'all probably have a bigger feel for that one than they would in central Indiana. In Indianapolis, they're probably not going to say port equipment and marine equipment makes a lot of sense. But up here it is important to you. It is important in Southwest Indiana, so we want to hear from everybody. And then also, should we look at putting some of the funds into the DERA option? If so, how much do you think we should put there? And I think one of the things that it doesn't necessarily say specifically here, what we're looking for is for folks to kind of prioritize. If you go to the portal, the VW Trust portal, and you look at the draft beneficiary mitigation plan that I updated earlier this week, I believe, you'll see there are prompts that are asking you questions to really get to the root of what makes sense. Prioritize this list of projects. Which ones make the most sense to you? What percentage of the allocation should go to these different types of projects? What should the percentage matches be? You'll see it says, we talk about matches in a couple of places. The mitigation trust, as it's written in the legal documents, will allow for up to 100% funding for the public forums, if you will, for municipalities, for lack of a better term, but only 75% for the private sector. Do you like that? Do you dislike that? Tell us what you think. These are things we really want to know about. We're also seeking input on some of the things I probably already said, but not necessarily. On the bottom one. The 15% of our funds, as we pointed out earlier, can go into electric vehicle infrastructure. We openly recognize that there is a desire for this in some areas of the state, and there is not a desire for this probably in other areas of the state. Tell us what you think for your area, what the value of that infrastructure would be. And then administrative costs, this is just more of a heads up that we're allowed to use some of these funds for administrative costs. In Indiana, for the last 17 years, as I said, I've administered Dieselwise Indiana. Where we're very different than other states is instead of a section that does it, here you just have me. So I'm a one-person show, which is challenging at times, but rewarding at times, and for you all, it's easy all the time, because you know who to talk to. The last one is just talking about how we really would like you to give us some valuable input, those things that I talked about before, what projects make sense, which projects don't, and such. So here's the development process. We're talking about the beneficiary mitigation plan. Remember, this is the guide that we will submit to the trustee, and then ultimately that's what we kind of use to identify what makes the most sense for project allocation. So the first thing that happens is we're going to take formal comments on the types of project funding distribution, and grantee match requirements through the web portal. I kind of touched on that. What we're doing, however, is we are now starting our more formal outreach. What we've been doing informally is I've been traveling around the state providing this information to a variety of people in more informal ways. Now what we're doing formally, that we've got the process going, is I'm traveling with the advisory committee. So certain members of the advisory committee, you've got Kay Nelson, that kind of is on the committee and sort of represents this region. She will be traveling around from place to place with me. I'm pretty confident she'll be here. I'm not going to say where else she'll be. That's her call, not mine. I get to go everywhere, good, bad, or otherwise. So what we're doing in these environments, though, is they're open public meetings where we're asking folks, stakeholders, whether you're a municipality, whether you're a private company, whether you're just a person that's interested in this, come to us and tell us what you think. Tell us what you think we should be incorporating into this BMP. Tell us what makes sense and what doesn't. And then we'll take that information through these 5 public meetings, as well as all the informal stuff that we've been doing, and that's what we use to formulate the plan. So that's the second one. We're going to use all of that to identify and develop a plan for review and approval of the advisory committee. The next step becomes the advisory committee. They're going to take that final draft of the BMP that we put together based on everybody's input. They're going to look at that and say, you know what, guys, this looks great. Or they're going to say, maybe we should change this. And either one is cool. We're just working through that process. So after that, once they approve that BMP in whatever form it may take, it will go to IDEM's commissioner, and then the commissioner is ultimately responsible for submitting that to the trustee. What happens after that is the part where the rubber meets the road, quite literally in many cases, and this is where a lot of the questions that you get will probably come from. and that is the solicitation process itself. How's it going to work, what's it going to look like, and such. So a solicitation will go out, identifying very clearly what eligible projects are, very consistent with what we've done for the last 17 years through Dieselwise, so it'll look very similar, I believe, to what folks have been seeing. So it won't be too new or too shocking. It will be to those who are just getting into the world of diesel emission reduction projects, however. Folks will submit their applications in accordance with those and the expectations and the requirements of that solicitation. The solicitation is going to be very clear in a lot of ways. It's going to tell you what is eligible and what is not. It's also going to provide an evaluation criteria so folks know on the front end what a good application is going to look like. Make sure you're hitting these points. You know, two key things that always play into our point scenario are the overall emission reduction potential of the project. So make sure you're telling us what the reductions are going to be, why they're better than the person next to you. We need to know that. That's how you're going to score better. Another one that always plays into it is leveraging. Leveraging of funds allows us to spread the funds as far and as wide as we can. So Project A and Project B are identical. The Project A is asking for 75% of the total cost. Project B is asking for 50% of the total cost. Project B is going to score a little better because they're allowing us to spread these funds a little wider. On that topic, $41 million, now you all, because you live in the world of CMAQ, $41 million doesn't make you go, wow, that's huge. But for a lot of people, they see that number and they think that's a huge number we'll never have to worry about. We can fund everything. One single locomotive project can easily be $2 million. So it's not as much money as it feels and sounds like it is. So leveraging will play a role potentially. We're going to review, score, prioritize, and then recommend projects to the advisory committee. The advisory committee will then take our recommendations and take presentations from applicants at designated meetings. This is when we will be traveling. We will probably have, we haven't decided what the approach is going to be, meaning where these meetings are going to take place, what they're going to look like, because these are things, if you remember the calendar, that we're having much later this year. But the advisory committee, along with IDEM, will hear people make presentations explaining to us the value of their project. And then ultimately, the advisory committee will approve the projects and they'll be formally accepted for funding. And at that point, you're pretty much hitting the ground running and you're starting to realize those NOx emission reductions that the Volkswagen Trust was intended to achieve. So with that, I open it up to questions. If you choose, it is your house. You tell me how you would like to proceed.
Does anybody on the commission, Commissioner Carnahan?
This doesn't pertain to this, but I saw on an investigation report on one of the TV stations pertaining to Volkswagen that timing chains were breaking, and this one lady had a vehicle that was just out of the local warranty, and they wanted $7,000 to put a new engine in her vehicle. And because of the station's investigation, Volkswagen agreed to give her a new engine, but there's a lot more of them out there with these timing chain projects. So Volkswagen, I don't think is doing a very good job.
Yeah, it's not relevant or specific to obviously this particular program, but it is a sign of maybe some other challenges there.
Is there any other commissioner? I want to get the commissioners an opportunity first before I go to the audience. Imam and then Kay.
Or the non-attainment area will be prioritized over attainment area?
The answer to that is probably not directly. One of the requirements of the BMP is that we have a way in which we address that. We know when we get grant applications, one of the, I guess I would say the scoring criteria is the area in which the project takes place and the sensitive populations around it. So the non-attainment areas, if they, and for what it's worth, there are no non-attainment areas currently in Indiana. But the non-attainment areas are not necessarily getting preference per se, but they will score better potentially just because of the sensitive population concept.
Thank you. Kay?
Good morning, everyone. Last Thursday, the advisory committee met for the first time and got our instructions on how a lot of what Sean went through for you here today, but also from an ethics standpoint. And obviously, I've been around for a while. I know a lot of you folks. I've been contacted by a lot of you to discuss your ideas. And the advisory committee members have been instructed to not have those discussions, but to refer you to Sean. So please don't feel offended if I look at you and say, I don't want to do anything to jeopardize your projects or our situation with our opportunities to receive funding. So I'm very excited by those who have let me know that they are considering projects and follow Sean's instructions. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Sir.
Now, has there been any examples from the diesel-wise projects that have gone on in Northwest Indiana that you think that will score highly through the Volkswagen Fund?
I wouldn't say in Northwest Indiana or really anywhere that there's like a single project that is a poster child, if you will. I think one thing, though, that really has kind of started to get traction in Northwest Indiana is the concept of alternative fuels. They're starting to really sort of, and as you know, right, it's really starting to get more and more appeal, more and more draw to it. One thing I think that is important to point out is that when we're talking about engine or vehicle replacements, those can be diesel vehicles to diesel vehicles, or they can be diesel to some alternative fuel. They can even be diesel vehicles or equipment all the way off to electric if such a thing exists. As long as the vehicle is serving the same purpose, we don't have any strong opinions as to whether one is necessarily better than the other or another.
Mr. Wright?
Would that opinion change if there was enough public comment recommending that? I guess not just in Northwest Indiana, but it's possibly going to be popular in Indianapolis or the Fort Wayne area, because that is something that I know some of the transit operators are looking into, is whether or not there'd be an advantage to going from diesel to electric or to another CNG or something like that.
Sure, and what I will say is yes and no, and it's a great answer, isn't it? And the reason is, will it change if there are comments? Yes, it will, but not directly because of those comments. So I was talking about the evaluation criteria. By the way, that is a great question. I was talking about the evaluation criteria. That first one that I mentioned is total emission reduction potential. You replace a diesel vehicle with a diesel vehicle, you're going to have an emission reduction. You replace a diesel vehicle with a CNG, a propane, or electric vehicle, you're going to have a greater reduction, more than likely. So that is going to cause that project to score better than the vehicle that is diesel to diesel. So directly, is there an influence, so to speak? No. But in the scoring of it, when the cream starts to climb towards the top, yeah, just by the simple math, it could climb towards the top.
Ms. Kegel?
I just wanted to remind everybody about, Sean's talking about the Diesel-Wise program and the similarities that he's seeing here. With South Shore Clean Cities and our Green Fleet program, which we run in cooperation with NERC, we have successfully applied for, on behalf of our members, the Green Fleet members, and received for them over $100 million in grant funds to do just that. And we have materials on the table out front that explain the Green Fleet program, that go through this process that Sean is talking about from a VW standpoint. And we also have our annual meeting coming up, so you can learn more about that there. There's more information there. But this is what we do. So while this is new to a lot of folks, this is, in essence, what we've been doing for almost the last 20 years very successfully, and why we are here to help you, achieve the greatest success that you can.
And if I would just tag on to what Lori's saying, because I think this is the bigger topic here is really important one. Don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to provide comments, even if you think they make no sense. Don't be afraid to apply for a project just because it's a small project. Some of the best projects we've ever funded, I literally funded a project that was, the application was handwritten on notebook paper for a mom and pop trucking company that literally couldn't operate if they didn't get this grant. Those things are there. Don't ever think your project is too big or too small, and don't ever be afraid to ask for help. On the, just one other thing, well, are there more questions? I'll let you field more questions if there are, and then I just want to touch only on this last slide.
I just want to quickly make a comment that don't be afraid of venturing into alternate fuels and other types of opportunities. We jumped in this with both feet in advance of the VW opportunities. The day after New Year's, many of you probably remember that bitterly cold day, our diesel trucks had to be returned to the barns because the diesel was gelling to the point the trucks could not work. Our CNG trucks ran all day without a hitch and actually worked all the way till 6:30 that night because the diesel trucks couldn't make the routes. CNG is certainly the way to go from a government perspective, as well as some of the other opportunities. But I will tell you, don't be afraid of going to alternate fuels. It is the future for us in Northwest Indiana.
Thank you for that comment, Commissioner. One more question, just in the sensitivity of time, if there's anybody who has any. I see readiness then to move along. Mr. Seals?
Just, I was going to give you the parting shot here on
Sure.
the last slide. That is, you'll see that there's my personal email address on the bottom. There's a VW Trust email address there as well. The VW Trust email address that you see on the screen is intended for comments. The personal address for me is intended for questions. So if you have questions, shoot them to me. If you have comments, shoot them to the VW Trust email address. That way all the comments kind of reside in one logical place, and that's why we're doing it that way. So I do appreciate you and your time.
Mr. Seals, thank you. Ms. Cagle, thank you very much. We appreciate what you presented us with, and we will contemplate it deeply. Thank you again. Now we're going to resume business. One quick notice, under my report of the chair, there's 4 options there. I'm inverting the exchange of the gavel and the schedule of NERC meetings. I feel like I've got to deliver under my current aegis all of that till the exchange of the gavel. That's just a minor thing. The matter up before us now is the minutes of December 14th of our full commission meeting from 2017. They were available online and distributed that way. You also have them before you this morning. I will either receive a motion if there is readiness from the commission members with regard to the disposition of the minutes, or if there isn't, I've read them and found them to be all right, and I'll just declare them without objection as approved under general consent. Is there a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved by many. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the December 17th, the 14th meeting. Is there any discussion on the motion? The maker of the motion wishes to speak in favor. Hearing none, does anybody wish to speak in opposition? Hearing none. As many as in favor say aye. Aye. As many as opposed say no. The ayes have it. The minutes of December 14th are adopted. I thank the commission. The next business in order is the report of the chair, which is the significant business of the full commission. One of at least 3 things I know the statute requires us to do: budget, executive director, this activity, and maybe, I guess, weighted voting would be the 4th. But those are the ones that the full commission is required by statute to do in full. The nominating committee was selected by the chair pursuant to protocol and convention, and it was made up of the senior officers of the board. They met in December, and before you have the report of the nominating committee making a recommendation before the body for the reorganization of the body for the coming year. Pursuant to statute, for the 4 officers, state law requires that no more than 2 persons for any given county are allowed to be in that, meaning you can only have 2 counties represented, not more than 2 counties being represented by any 2 members of the body. Because of a practice that's been in place, and I hope will be adopted in the formal rules or bylaws that are pending, we have tried to rotate that so that every year the person who becomes chair will be from a different county, so that rotation works very well. So as you see, the report of the committee is Jeff Benson is chairperson from Porter County, Diane Knoll is vice chairperson from LaPorte County, Secretary Karen Freeman Wilson from Lake County, and George Topple from Porter County as treasurer. Also, the statute requires that there be also an executive committee made up of 2 persons from each county that NERC serves. So for Lake County, the recommendation of the nominating committee is Anthony Copeland and Tom McDermott. For LaPorte County, the recommendation is Mayor Mark Prince, which we're glad to have. And we're glad to have everybody, by the way, but it's just nice to see you. You're relatively new, so it's good to have you here. and Justin Kyle. And Executive Board representatives from Porter County are Jim Tunt and Greg Stinson. Now, Ed Soliday is, by virtue of the governor's appointment, a member of this board, and so he's not subject to vote. He's the prerogative of the governor. And I'm immediate past chair because I hope that somebody will be voting as chair today, and that will be automatic for me, and I appreciate that. Having presented that, because the conventions have been to receive this report and act on it, it is also a parliamentary custom to allow nominations. And I'm going to take nominations for the position of chairperson. Are there any nominations? Are there any nominations? Hearing none, nominations are closed. Is there any nominations for the position of vice chairperson? Are there any nominations? Are there any nominations? Hearing none, nominations are closed. Are there any nominations for the office of secretary? Are there any nominations? Are there any nominations? Hearing none, the nominations are closed for secretary. Are there any nominations for the office of treasurer? Hearing none, nominations are closed. Are there any nominations for the executive board? Any one of the 6 seats? Hearing none, nominations are closed. The chair will receive a motion to elect the members who are represented on the report of the nominating committee.
Motion.
It's been moved to elect the members who are represented in the report of the nominating committee. Is there a second? Second. It's been moved and seconded. Is the proponent of the motion wish to speak in favor of his motion?
No.
I don't generally get that very much. This is the one time I have to.
Softly.
All right. I'm trying to keep it up there.
He's using his outside
I'm using my outside gap. Does anybody wish to speak in opposition? Hearing none. As many as in favor of the motion to elect the members who are represented on the report from the nominating committee, say aye. Aye. As many opposed, say no. The ayes have it. The report is received. Jeff Benson is elected as chairperson. Vice chairperson is Diane Knoll. Karen Freeman Wilson as secretary. George Topol as treasurer. Anthony Copeland, Tom McDermott, Mark Prince, Justin Kyle, Jim Tunt, and Greg Stinson are now members of the executive committee. You are duly elected. Congratulations. If there'll be no objection from the incoming chair, I'm going to reserve some comments about my appreciation towards the end under announcements. But one last act I have to do as your chair. You had in your packet on page 4 the representation of the meeting for the coming year, 2018. The statute requires that we set our meetings, so as the full commission that needs to be approved. Is there a motion to approve the meetings as presented to you?
So moved.
It's been moved. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded to approve the meetings that are represented in the report. Does anybody want to speak in favor of the motion? Who moved it? Wait, you didn't, did you move it?
No.
Then who wants to speak in favor of it? Does anyone want to speak in opposition? Now I recognize you to speak.
I just have a question.
The question is received.
My question is, in previous years, we didn't have a meeting in November, and then we had a meeting in December. Why the change?
I'm happy to respond to that. We have, as you'll hear a little bit later, we have some performance measure targets we have to hit through the federal government for our requirements, and the timeline of that requires us to approve those by the timeline of the other things we have to do to get to that point in November. And it so happens that this particular year, the third Thursday is November 15th, so there's not as much of a conflict with Thanksgiving as there's been in the past. So in the past, we've moved the December meeting up and not had a November meeting. This year, we'll have a November meeting, but not have a December meeting.
Thanks for the clarification.
Thank you for the question that helped edify that. Is there any other discussion on the motion that's pending? Discerning that there's no further willingness to speak about this matter, as many as in favor of adopting the meeting date, say aye. Aye. As many opposed, say no. The ayes have it. The meeting dates as presented here are adopted. One last point. You'll see this beautiful pin I have here for members. Newest members who have not been here before, or members who were here before but didn't get one, are entitled to a membership pin. It has these beautiful arrayed colors. And I guess that's my last act as chair. I thank you, but with leave of the commission at the end, I'll have more to say. Thank you. Let's trade. He really wanted you to have.
I know. If I could take the prerogative, we have a traditional plaque. It's not quite as large of a gavel, so it won't make quite the same resonance. I've lost the hearing in this year. So depending on how Jeff runs the rest of this meeting, it may be balanced. I don't know. But this is official. It is removable. So
nice. So I can practice and make it right.
That's right. So As we all know, Michael Griffin's term as chair has greatly increased all of our vocabulary. I'm very, very grateful for that. And Michael has been a phenomenal chair. And I'm thankful for this whole arrangement where the past chair stays on the executive board. All the chairs have been great, and in my term here. And I'm looking forward to having Jeff back on. Jeff was chair when I was hired, and then Michael has been just phenomenal. So thank you for all of your service and for all of your hard work.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much.
I don't know when I'll get that, but we'll see. Thank you. This is great. The next thing on the agenda is the report of the executive director.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. Thank you all for making it through the frozen tundra today and being here. Happy New Year. Be watching your inboxes. You'll have a year review reflecting on all the activities of 2017 coming to you very soon. Appreciate staff's efforts in helping to put that together, and you can reflect on everything that's happened over this past year under Michael's leadership. I also wanted to just underscore again what Lori had mentioned about the event at Hobart that took place earlier this week. Congratulations again to the City of Hobart on their new garage and the CNG fueling station. Very well attended, phenomenal facility. And I had the privilege of making a few comments at that event. And as I said there, it's so helpful to have something to point to in the region that all of you can benefit by going to see and learn from. So I'm sure the mayor wouldn't mind me saying that the invitation is open, I'm sure, to see how they've done that and to talk with them about how to do similar things in your communities. And also just to underscore again with Ryan and Lori here, how great a partnership South Shore Clean Cities has been. As was mentioned, this goes back 20 years. This partnership has happened with NERC, and as has been communicated, so much has happened in that time period. So we're grateful for that partnership that we have. I didn't get a chance to introduce last meeting two of our new staff members because they were at a training in Chicago. But I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce our new chief accountant, Talea Jones. Talea, if you wouldn't mind standing up in the back, sorry to embarrass you. Talea comes to us from East Chicago. Thank you, Mayor Copeland, for helping to produce great people in this. I was robbed. The great thing about NERC is that all that talent still gets to benefit you at NERC. So thank you very much, and thank you, Talea, for joining us. And I'd also like to introduce our new Director of Transportation, Trey Wadsworth. Trey comes to us from the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, so has moved here from Boston to escape the cold. I'm just kidding. Trey's job is essentially to be Mr. MPO and make sure all our T's are crossed and I's are dotted. So I'm thrilled to have both of them on board as our staffing continues to get fleshed out. So welcome, and there's some faces that I would welcome your contact with and talking to anytime you get the opportunity. The last thing just to mention is that coming up, I think before the next meeting in February, Mr. Benson will be serving as, coming up in president-elect right now, but will be the president of NARC, National Association of Regional Councils. Justin Keel is officially on the board now as well at NARC, and Dave Schaefer continues to serve as past president. So you, again, as we have often said, NARC is well represented by Northwestern Indiana. The thing is, about the second week in February, we'll be out to NARC's legislative conference in DC. Once again, I'm not only hearing from everything that's happening on the federal level, but also being able to make visits to our delegation there. So look forward to that trip and look forward to reporting on what happens in DC and getting the view from Washington at that time. So that's all I have.
Just that our new treasurer, our secretary, Karen Freeman Wilson, is serving in leadership out of National League of Cities as well.
That's right.
And so Northwest Indiana is well represented.
Which I might add, not to belabor this, but National League of Cities and NARC moved their offices, so I believe they're in the same building. So there's a lot better interaction between those two organizations on a daily basis. And National Association of Communities as well.
The next report is Finance and Personnel Committee, Dave Schaefer. Joe, he's not here. And they didn't have a meeting, so we'll move on. The Environmental Management Policy Committee, Jeff Benson, there wasn't a meeting. So the first Thursdays at 9 a.m. in this room. You're welcome to attend. Technical Planning Committee is next. And Kevin Brightsky, who's not here. George, are you gonna?
Well, I am.
Pitch? There we go. Excellent.
The Technical Planning Committee report for, as of today, which was January 9th, staff gave several updates and presented short videos on snack downs and interesting infrastructure features. The meeting was streamed live. There are two actions for consideration. Resolution 1802, supporting Indiana Department of Transportation for safety performance measures targets for fatalities and injuries is found on page 7 through 9. Stevens is there, will explain this action. Please, Steve.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Sorry, kind of going backward in this and controlling the camera and all sorts of fun stuff today. Right, let's go. Okay, just a very brief presentation on what's on pages 7 through 9 of your agenda. So these are the 2018 safety performance measure targets that we do have to adopt we as part of what the FAST Act of 2015 requires. So FAST Act of 2015 establishes performance-based planning measures for various types of transportation, among them safety. Safety was the first one out of the gate that they established rules and targets for. So the 5 measures that the feds are looking for targets for each year are the number of fatalities, the rate of fatalities per 100 million miles traveled, the number of serious injuries, the rate of serious injuries per 100 million miles traveled, as well as the number of non-motorized fatalities and non-motorized serious injuries. So these are their 5 things that they would like to see targets set at, and the targets are based on a 5-year rolling average. So the schedule for this, starting last year, by August, INDOT was required to submit their safety targets for the state to the feds. So then that kind of started the clock ticking for us and the other MPOs in the state. So then by February 27th of this year, we're going to have to report to INDOT and the feds what our safety targets are. Now we kind of have an option. We can either set our own, or we can just go ahead and say that we choose to support the state in achieving their targets, which is what we're actually looking at doing here. It's just going ahead and just going along with what the state's targets are. So then, as you can see there, moving into the future, December 2019, data is going to be available to help evaluate the targets, see how us and INDOT did moving towards those targets. And then by March of 2020, we'll be notified whether or not significant progress was made for calendar year 2018. So as you can see here, I just put this table, and this table's from INDOT, so these are statewide numbers, but these show those 5 items. And I just wanted to show this because it kind of shows the overall trend as the economy has continued to improve and recover from the recession of 2008. As you can see, more people are on the road, and therefore more people are on the road. You see that, unfortunately, the trend has generally been increases in things like fatalities and serious injuries. So that's definitely not the way you want to see things go, but that's the reality of the situation at the moment. And that orange column there, the 2018 column, that column there is what INDOT is projecting for those same factors for the year 2018, based on the trends. There's all sorts of complicated math formulas and everything else. Very smart people came up with that. So, oops, that's a little cut off there, but basically here are the targets. Look for 2018. So as you can see there, the 5-year average in 2017 for number of fatalities was 802.5. Their target 5-year average is 814.9, which is a, sorry, because I got it off, a 1.5% increase. So Indiana is actually unique, or among a small group of states which actually allowed higher targets. Some states said no, they must be lower, they must go lower, but Basically, what they're looking at is the overall trend is upward, so starting to kind of mitigate that upward trend. So, right, so you may have a slight increase, but your increase wouldn't necessarily be as much as it would have been otherwise. So kind of keep that in mind when you're seeing that in percentage increase overall. That's sort of the thought behind it. There is some logic there. The rate of fatalities per 100 million miles traveled, you can see that target is a 1.3% increase over 2017. So 2017 it was 1.023. They're shooting for 1.036 for 2018. Number of serious injuries, increase of 0.8%. So 2017, the 5-year average was 3,452.5. Target 5-year average is 3,479.8. Rate of serious injuries per 100 million miles traveled, they're looking at a decrease of 0.07% from the 2017 5-year average of 4.350 down to 4.347 for 2018. And finally, the number of non-motorized fatalities and non-motorized serious injuries, they're looking at an increase of 5.8%. The 2017 5-year average was 394. Their target for 2018 is 417, and I believe that is the last slide. So hopefully your hair isn't going back or anything. I just didn't want to swamp you with numbers, and it is on all of this is also on page 9 of your agenda accompanying the resolution. Are there any questions I can attempt to hopefully answer?
No, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Chairman, the Technical Planning Committee recommends adoption of Resolution 18-02.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. You wish to speak in favor?
I'm in favor.
All right. Any discussion? All in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Next, a 7-day public comment period on Amendment 8 to the fiscal year 2018-2021 Transportation Improvement Program ended on January 8th with no comments received. The report is on page 10. The final action is on Resolution 18-01, the 8th Amendment to the fiscal year 2018-2021 Transportation Improvement Program, found on pages 11 through 13. Mr. Charles Bradsky will explain this action.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
First off, we only have one amendment. And on page 13, that's number 1383364, Porter County had a project, and they originally thought that they did not need right-of-way. But as we all know, when we do projects around the house, things change, and they ended up by needing right-of-way. So therefore, this amendment includes that right-of-way phase back into the project. The other two that you see are for 0710056. This is the Munster project, 45th Avenue, that we are so greatly looking forward to, especially if you live in Munster, Highland area, around Calumet Avenue, 45th. Munster has run into a little snag with the railroad, and as Lindsay Quist in NDOT will tell you, that railroads are not the easiest people to work with. They have been graciously, the railroads have been graciously working, or I should say, they have been not graciously working with Munster. And so that project had to be pushed back a couple months. Therefore, it pushes it back into 2019 from 2018. And we are looking at an August letting for that project. So therefore, these two phases, the monies for the construction phase are moving from FY18 to FY19.
Thank you, Mr. Bradsky. Mr. Chairman, the Technical Planning Committee recommends adoption of Resolution 18-01.
Is there a motion?
I move its adoption.
Is there a second? Second. Great. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, it passes.
The next meeting of the Technical Planning Committee will be February 13th at 9 o'clock, right here at Brook Street.
Wonderful. Without a gavel, the next on the agenda is the report from INDOT, Rick Powers, Deputy Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think everyone, other than the gavel, miss your elements. I mean, my office, people who work with me know I have 3 things there laying. Very large dictionary, open to P for professional, which I wish everyone would practice acting. 2, a style manual. That's good stuff. And then the third is a thesaurus. And you have challenged me in all 3 areas this year. I would agree. It's on, I'm sorry, me and my voice, you know that. I don't have an outside voice anymore, Christine's gone, so I'll try my best to talk in the night. We have been fully engaged in winter. If you've been watching the news or traveled anywhere between here and Michigan or Illinois, the fickle finger of lake effect snow off of the lake has been basically, believe it or not, Gary sub in and of itself is the third, I would say, as far as performance for winter operations, which is our largest sub. Our LaPorte sub and our Plymouth sub have been actively engaged since Christmas Eve. Fighting daily with very few breaks. It would be 24/7 overtime. Our fleet's taking, I guess, a beating, if you will, relative to the sub-zero temperatures, some of which is DEF issues related, not necessarily fuel, but the fuel additives that are not conducive to, I guess, very low temperatures. And we're dealing with those things as they occur. But at least it's not the maintenance of the fleet that is the issue. It's the things that we are trying to deal with dealerships and trying to stand behind the product. That being said, we're still doing well, I would say. In fact, we're getting a lot of compliments from law enforcement and others in doing that, but they are tired. Our people are tired, our trucks are tired, the roads are getting tired. So you're not seeing the pothole replacement or filling and a lot of those things that you would normally see following storms, because the storm simply has not ended. And nor has the temperature been conducive to doing those types of repairs. But I assure you, as soon as we do get there, we will. And I really don't want to belabor that point too much more, because you all live in it and see it every day just like we do. The last couple of years, I think, has lulled us into a point of the previous years that we thought maybe this is what northern Indiana was like. I think this year is what we know northern Indiana to be like. So that being said, we ask and indulge your patience while we move through it. We are doing our best. Our staff is working hard to fight this winter. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
And welcome, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Legislative Committee. Mary, Janice?
I want to thank all of you for your patience. We did not have a meeting this time, but I went through a lot of the information that I've received here at NERC and come up with 3 topics that are certainly pertinent to what we've been discussing. First one is the tax appeals, second is infrastructure, and the third one is water. As most of you know, we need to have data to give to our legislators. You have to hand them something. We've heard this all the time from our legislators. So if you have any information about tax appeals that we can use to help them understand, please send it to me, please email it to me, or you can email it to Ty and he'll give it to me. What I'm looking at is probably the first 2 weeks in February, having a formal meeting so that we can digest all the information that we have received by that time. I've also been in contact with AIM. They're kind of going through a lot of the legislation that's presented down in Indianapolis right now. They have not even come up with a solution, particularly the tax appeals. So hopefully a lot of those bills will be dropped aside by that time, and we can see where we are at that point in time. But again, I can't stress enough, those 3 issues are so important to all of us that we need to maintain our pressure on them. And I know a lot of you do emailing. You know, I like to go down there and talk to them, but I like to have a sheet of paper to present to them to let them know where we are in Northwest Indiana. So I look forward to having a meeting sometime in the first 2 weeks in February, and I want to thank you for your patience.
Great, thank you. Speaking of committees and other business, there will be, you will all be asked what committee you want to be on for this coming year, and if those who don't sign up and say what they want to be on will get put on some, so speak your mind, and I'm sure that Mary will help me get that out to everybody. Michael, do you want to speak in other business, or you want to wait for announcements?
Whatever you think's appropriate, Mr. Chairman.
This would be great.
I'll do that for you, and I thank you for the opportunity. Firstly, I want to tell you that I love being a member of this commission. I've loved it since I've been on it originally in 2003, and although I had a brief hiatus, I'm so glad I got a chance to be back, and I am highly honored that you all thought well enough of me to confer the opportunity to be a servant leader for you as your chair. I recognize Mayor Sedekor, Mayor Stahura, Mr. Tunn, and Jeff Benson as past presidents, or past chairs of this board, and I thought they represent the tall grass. So I didn't know if I could match the kind of quality of leadership that they exhibit all the time, but I tried my very best. We opened with hope. I've come back from the Holy Land recently, Israel and Jordan. After 14 days, I had no phone. I was totally disconnected to focus on that experience. This is my pilgrimage beard. I will be getting rid of it, by the way, for those who are watching. But hope is what NERC's about. I often say to everybody, this is a body of almost 54 or 53 people that represent elected officials who represent people in communities. And what in democracy we get rewarded for is doing good for them. And yet these people come around here who are arguably designed to be parochial and somehow fashion something regional all the time. That is the triumph of structure, of hope over structure. Because every one of us comes here with the point of view of helping our community, and yet we seem to be elevated by this assembly enough to know that it's important for Highland's sake that Hobart does well. It's important for Cherville's sake that Porter does well, and so on and so on. In fact, having just come from the Holy Land, if you'll forbear me, I think very much of the question posed in my faith tradition to Jesus about who is our neighbor. I thought about that a lot. I was actually at the place where that question was presumably posed. And I thought of here, of all things, because my neighbor is every one of you. Not just the people who live one door away from me where I live, or one door or a block away, but it's beyond that. I love going to Beggar's Pizza in Whiting. I love that my mother-in-law is from Hobart, and she doesn't stay there and comes to visit me a lot. I love that too. And Christian love. One of the things that I hope has been exhibited that informs my public service, particularly here, some words by Frederick Buckner. He's one of my two favorite theologians. He never actually practiced as a full-time pastor. He was a writer most of his life, but later in his life, he decided that he was called to a ministry and he could write like nobody could write. His sermons are amazing. When he was asked to define what ministry was, he said that it is the place where his deepest joy meets the place of the world's greatest need. When I heard that, I thought about that's what informed my public service. I'm not so immodest as to believe I'm doing world-shaking things, but I do believe that what I do is the place of my deepest joy. Being in public life, being able to associate with all of you, being able to do good for the people of my community, even if it's simply because we have a balanced budget and some surplus. That in its way supports the good that the officials of our community get to carry out. And I do believe I'm meeting a community need. But I'm meeting it not just for Highland, but for Griffith, and for LaPorte, and for Porter, for Dune Acres, and on, because you are all my neighbors. So I hope that you will keep that in mind as you continue your service. I hope I'll be allowed the opportunity to finish the task force's work of the bylaws and rules, which are being reviewed by staff and the attorney now, but we'll have one more crack at before we deliver for the full commission to take up. And then I want to leave you with this. In the holy words of my faith tradition, in Galatians chapter 6, verse 9, let us not grow weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we lose not our heart. Lose not your heart, everyone, and thank you for the continuing opportunity and joy of being able to serve with all of you who are exemplars of public service and from whom I learned so much. Thank you for this chance.
clear a little bit. But next on the agenda is announcements. Bob?
16 Plus is a Lake County organization that meets at the Schererville Town Hall on the fourth Friday, and that is next Friday. And we're going to have Lake County Council coming in to talk about their master plan. So anybody from Lake County, I'd encourage you to be at the meeting at 9 a.m. in the Schererville Town Hall next Friday.
Okay. Any other announcements?
Yeah, I just want to make an announcement. It'll be in the news today in the region that last night the recently retired Border Fire Chief Louis T. Craig passed away. Louis had been a member of our volunteer force for 45 years, had been our fire chief for 27 years. Retired last Tuesday. We had a retirement party for him on Friday, and he was found non-responsive and passed away last night. On behalf of a grateful town, I want to express my condolences and thanks for his service. I'd also currently like to thank the towns of Chesterton and Burns Harbor, whose fire departments are covering for our department right now as they kind of work their way through this. So, that's all. He was a great man. He will be missed. Thank you.
Michael?
Yes.
I heard you speak that in about that balanced budget and the surplus.
Yes.
I too conclude the same thing.
Good for you.
Yes, on behalf of the Crossroads Regional Chamber of Commerce, we are hosting Senator Joe Donnelly in a morning business hour at the Chamber office in Maryville. The Crossroads Chamber is composed of Maryville, Crown Point, and Winfield. And that will be Friday, February 16th from 8 to 9 in the morning. It will be a morning business hour, and everybody's invited to attend.
Hi.
I just have a couple of quick things. I should have said earlier when I talked about our visit to Washington, the issues that we'll be talking through, we basically connect on Northwest Indiana and what's happening here as we meet with our delegation, but we'll be continuing some of the issues that we've had in the past, which is being aware of the need for thinking ahead about avoiding the next fiscal cliff for highway funding and the Highway Trust Fund, and the importance of having the reauthorization going. Also for the Economic Development Administration, as we seek to get our Economic Development District designation, support for that. And then in conversations with our partners at MICOG, Michiana Area Council of Governments, and their legislative platform, we've both talked about the need to talk about the importance of the census and how much the census is important for obtaining the funding that we need for our projects and initiatives. So I just realized I forgot to mention what we will be talking about in DC. And we'll be working with the legislative committee as well on other federal initiatives, in addition to the state ones that Ms. Tanis has mentioned. And then I also just wanted to real quickly thank Stephen. Stephen gave essentially his last public comment report. Stephen is leaving us at the end of the month to go to the Illinois Soybean Alliance. Do they have that correct? Association, Illinois Soybean Association is their event planner. So he did such a great job with our MPO conference we held. I think we got the conference event bug, and so we'll be taking that position. But to thank him for all of his service, I actually feel responsible for him being here at NERPC. It was an event that I held and coordinated before I ever came to NERPC that I invited John Swanson, my predecessor, to. That Stephen also came to, connected with John, and then, long story short, ended up here at NERPC. So I feel somewhat responsible for bringing him here and appreciate his service for, how long has it been again that you've been?
I started as an intern in November of 2009.
2009. So thank you.
Thank you.
Really quick before we adjourn, I believe I like contrasts. The last time I was the chair of NERPC, Mayor McDermott was the chair preceding me, so it went from the largest city to one of the smallest as the chair, and now it's going from one of the most eloquent elected officials to Is there a motion to adjourn? Second? All in favor?
Aye.